"That's mine," she stuttered. She was covering her stuff shyly with her hands. In some bizarre accident, I had once seen her underwear, but she seemed even more flustered now. Seeing her like that, I couldn't help but. "My name's Bob Thompson. I'm a chef who runs a restaurant. My parents were cooks and I started my training at 16 and learned to cook for 8 years, and 2 years ago I started my own place. Things are finally starting to look up for the business. Sure, I'm making a decent buck, but other than food, I don't have much of an interest in anything else, so I live in a very average apartment. It's on the ground floor, so I have a yard, but other than smoking there, I don't use it much." That day was a day off from the restaurant, and I was taking it easy at home. Then, something fell into my yard. Sometimes stuff from the upstairs neighbors falls down, so I figured it was probably that, but when I went out to pick it up, it turned out to be a bright red bra. Just as I was thinking about how awkward it would be to return it, that's when it happened. "Help me, please," a voice came from above. Looking up, a woman in worn-out clothes was looking down at me, calling out, "I'm sorry, I can't open the window. I'm locked out on the balcony. What, are you okay?" Apparently, she couldn't get back into her apartment and was trying to get someone's attention by throwing the underwear she had. I promptly went to the landlord's office to explain the situation. Taking the landlord to the apartment above, I watched as the woman was rescued by him. With teary eyes, she thanked us and promised, "I'll come by to thank you properly soon." And with that, we called it a day. A few days later, that woman, called Miss Emily Wilson, came by with some homemade sweets. Emily, a struggling student, said apologetically, "It's not much, but it seems she doesn't buy new clothes very often, hence why she was wearing such tattered clothes the other day." Without making a fuss, I handed over the underwear that I had not yet returned. It was neatly packed in a bag. Her face turned bright red. She chuckled and said, "I'm sorry about this." When I concerned myself with how difficult it must have been for her after what happened yesterday, she said that apparently something got stuck between the windows and she couldn't open them. I should really clean my room. I need to be careful too. Just then, her cell phone rings. Seeing her hesitate, I said, "Go ahead," and she took the call, started to talk. Her tone of voice clearly dropped as she said, "Understood," before hanging up and sighing heavily. "Are you okay?" "Well, they cut my hours at my part-time job. I need to pay my student loans, so I guess I'll have to find another job." Apparently, Emily's parents are quite well off and they're the ones paying for her apartment. However, not wanting to rely on them forever, she's taken it upon herself to handle everything else on her own. Without giving it much thought, I asked her while she was feeling down, "Would you like to work at my place?" At the surprised Emily, I told her that I run a restaurant and that I was considering posting a job opening since we were short on floor staff. Then Emily bowed her head and said, "Please." For my part, it saved me the cost of the job ad, and thus Emily ended up working at my restaurant. Emily was very sincere, quick to learn, and above all, she was friendly. Since it's a French restaurant, floor staff often get asked about wines. Emily was also knowledgeable about wine, and in that sense, she was a great asset to us right away. She took on almost all the night shifts and ate her staff meals with relish. I can save on food expenses with staff meals. When I asked her to take a break once in a while as she's busy with university, that was the answer I got, and I couldn't help but laugh. She's struggling financially, but it seems like her pride won't let her rely on her parents. While I find her independence impressive, I can't help but feel that it's okay for her, still a young girl, to rely on others sometimes. Well, that's different for everyone. A few months have passed since Emily started her part-time job. This day was the busy Christmas season, and both the kitchen and the floor were bustling. We had more customers than expected, and the kitchen started to get overwhelmed. With a significant increase in customers from last year, we simply couldn't keep up with the dessert plating. Sorry, Emily, can you handle the dessert plating? Me, I'll show you once, just do it roughly. The desserts and fruits are all already prepared. In our place, we don't employ a pastry chef. Instead, the chefs take turns preparing the desserts. I showed Emily how to plate the desserts once, and she immediately started plating several just like it. Her work was efficient and, in fact, her plating was even better than mine. I found it intriguing, but I was too busy to ponder it. A few hours later, we finally got through all the customers and decided to have our staff meal. Since it's close to Christmas, there were cakes too. Emily was happily munching on her cake. You were a big help, Emily. Thanks to you, we managed. You're really talented. And no, I'm not. It was when Emily said this bashfully. Hey, who left these papers here? The ones for the certified baker. Matthew from the floor staff had the papers that had been left near the locker. It seems that in the hustle and bustle, someone moved the papers that were near the locker onto the desk. But a certified baker, that's a pastry chef certification. One of the chefs must be studying for it. But then, that's mine, Emily. Her face redder than when her underwear was seen, covered her mouth, now white with cream, and raised her hand. Heck, it's so embarrassing. Emily quickly went to retrieve her papers. Come to think of it, Emily is in her sophomore year of college. She should meet the eligibility requirements for the exam. I was studying because I wanted to become a pastry chef, but I didn't want anyone to know in case I failed the exam. Really, I could have helped you study if you told me. What? I have the certification too, and I even have past exam papers. What? Emily's eyes widened in surprise. I met the exam eligibility too, so when I took it, I passed. I was lucky though. You must be busy studying for the exam, so would you like to switch from floor duties to handling desserts? You'll only be doing the plating, not making the desserts. Is that okay? You can do the dishes until the dessert orders come in, and then study when you're done. The busy season is almost over, and the certified baker is a national certification. It was my way of showing consideration, considering how tough the study must be. Ever since then, Emily has been in charge of dessert plating, and when there were no desserts to serve, she would study in a corner. She would ask me what she didn't understand, and sometimes a few young chefs would join in, quizzing each other about the problems, which was a fun topic in its own right. Of course, when it was busy, she would concentrate on plating, and as far as I was concerned, as long as she did her work, she was free to spend her spare time improving herself. In fact, the other chefs would study wine when they had spare time too. And so time passed, and half a year later. Bob, I passed. Oh, congratulations. Emily passed her certification exam splendidly. The passing rate isn't high, so it's truly her hard work that paid off. All the chefs in the kitchen were delighted, and it goes without saying that Emily's meal that day was a bit more luxurious. All the other chefs who had taken the exam on a whim had failed spectacularly. Bob and everyone else, thank you so much. Not many people in my college class passed, so I'm incredibly happy. Emily had a beaming smile on her face. However, even though the exam was over, she was still a student. There's still a mountain of things she needs to study. So, as usual, I told her she could study when the restaurant wasn't busy, to which Emily, as expected, was hesitant, saying, I can't possibly have you do so much for me. But both in the kitchen and on the floor, Emily's brightness and positivity were a saving grace. Everyone wanted to help Dad because of Emily. When I told her this, Emily's face turned red, and she muttered, "I will repay this kindness someday." Several months later, a reservation for dinner came in. It was a couple who ordered the highest-priced set menu, and the serving was handled by Matthew. I was giving instructions briskly. "Emily, could you please prepare the dessert?" "Sure." Upon saying so, Emily started preparing the dessert included in the course. I always made a point of greeting customers who ordered the most expensive menu in my restaurant. Being a small business, I believed it was important to pay such attention to detail. After Matthew brought the dessert and some time had passed, I decided to head over to the customer's table, but when I got there, the customer was nowhere to be found. "They haven't even paid yet," I muttered, looking around the room, when suddenly someone tapped me on the shoulder. "Whoa, oh, I apologize. I didn't mean to startle you. I asked the staff to call for the owner, but we must have crossed paths." "I see. I apologize for the inconvenience." With that, I first had the customers seated. They had mentioned needing me for something, and for a moment, I tensed, wondering if it was a complaint. "We wanted to thank you." "Thank me? The truth is," the customer began to say. "What, Dad, Mom?" a surprised voice rang out. Looking over, I saw Emily with wide eyes looking at us. Dad, Emily's parents." "Yes, that's right. What are you doing here?" "Well, it's only proper to express gratitude to those who have been kind to our daughter, isn't it?" With that, the customer, no, the father of Emily, Harry, took out his business card. As I hastily accepted it, wait, the card bore the name of a major franchise company. I knew Emily's parents were wealthy, but I had no idea they were in the restaurant business. She wants to work in the food industry in the future and is studying for a certification. I hear you've been helping her. No, it's all thanks to Emily's hard work. I simply spoke the truth. Emily, looking embarrassed, muttered, "Dad, please stop." As a daughter, this must be a cringy moment. But, with parents who run a major franchise, she'll never have to worry about finding a job. Once you graduate, I'm sure she'll make an excellent manager. Emily is a quick learner in the life of the party. Haha, it's nice to hear that from the person who's been so helpful, Harry said when. I won't work. I won't work at my dad's place. I want to be a pastry chef at this restaurant. Wait, what? I was taken aback by her shocking declaration. I was, to say the least, frozen. All the more so because she made that declaration in front of her father. You said you need a pastry chef. The head chef even said he'd welcome me. I want to pay back your kindness. Please let me work. With that, Emily bowed her head. Indeed, Emily is in charge of desserts, and if she practices from now, she should be able to make desserts. Her serious eyes had me puzzled, but honestly, it would be a big help if Emily could work as a pastry chef in the kitchen. Moreover, when Harry says, Emily is so insistent, I'm sorry to ask, but could I ask you to keep an eye on her for a little while longer? I have no reason to refuse. We'll have to start studying recipes from tomorrow then. Yes, thank you very much, Emily replied with a cheerful smile. Fast forward a few years. My restaurant has become so popular with a 3-month wait for reservations. Actually, after that, a dish I supervised ended up on the menu of Harry's franchise store as a limited-time offering. The dish was unexpectedly well received, which made the restaurant quite popular. After graduating from college, Emily officially joined my restaurant as a pastry chef, and now we have a fair number of female customers who come specifically for Emily's desserts. Given its popularity, we're finally opening a second location, a cafe. I plan to have Emily take charge of the kitchen there. I really owe Emily a lot, and it's no exaggeration to say that we were able to open the second location thanks to her. But no one would ever guess that our meeting was sparked by a red piece of underwear and the fact that we're dating. Moreover, with the both parents' approval, I planned to give her a ring, but she said, let's wait until the restaurant gets on track, so they'll have to wait. Now the restaurant seems to be more important to her than I am, which is a bit frustrating. Oh well. By the way, the red bra that set off this fate-like string of events seems to have been finally thrown away, but the third generation one occasionally appears in the laundry. It seems that it was originally something she bought on sale, but now she apparently wears it as her lucky charm underwear for good luck. She wears it when something important is happening. Yes, on days like today. Bob, what are you doing? We're opening soon. I know. Today is the opening day of the second location. Customers are already lining up, and it's bustling. The two of us will open the door and probably greet them with smiles. Welcome. I know this is sudden, but can you stay at my place for a month, starting next month? This utterly unexpected request came from the newly transferred female chief, who had suddenly called me in. It was more than enough to throw me into a state of confusion. This utterly unexpected request came from the newly transferred female chief, who had suddenly called me in. We're not close enough for me to be living at her place. Excuse me. While I was taken aback, the chief blushed, fidgeting in embarrassment. Through this request from the chief, my life was about to take a significant turn. My name is Thomas Mason. I'm 32 years old and work at an elderly care facility. I've always loved interacting with older folks since I was a kid, being quite the granny's boy, so caregiving is the perfect job for me. However, the caregiving staff at work are mostly women in their 50s and 60s, and there are only two men, me and the chief. That's why the chief and I often take on heavy lifting, and I was a little dissatisfied with the unfair division of work. But I can't voice such complaints to female staff. The chief, who was the only one I could rely on, has already passed the age of 65 and will retire. Once the chief retires, will I help everyone with their work? Well, until now, the work was finished because the chief helped me with the work. Such thoughts filled my mind, and I couldn't help but sigh. Then, the chief retired in no time, and a 35-year-old female chief was assigned from another department. My name is Kay Scott. Nice to meet you all. When she introduced herself to us, I felt that Miss Scott suddenly looked surprised when her eyes met mine, and quickly averted her gaze. Then, she continued with her greeting. What's going on? Does she know me? But I don't know her. I started working, with a little strange feeling. Unlike the previous chief, the new chief did not seem intimidated by the older staff in their 50s and 60s and was not shy about giving work instructions. Helen, one of the residents is calling you. Please attend to them. Jessica, you left meal assistants halfway to guide someone else to their room, didn't you? Please finish one task before moving on to the next. The new chief was brisk in her directives and closely observed the movements of the caregiving staff, giving necessary corrections. There was no wasted motion in her work, and her directions and reminders were always on point. However, the Queen Bee staff, who had been there for many years, didn't like being instructed by a younger chief. She's acting high and mighty for being so young. She's getting carried away just because she's the chief. Complaints about the chief had become commonplace at work. And for some reason, the chief didn't give me any work instructions. It was as if she thought, you can handle things on your own, right, even without her saying it. Seeing this, the Queen Bee staff members started complaining about the chief again. It's weird how she only gives us instructions and doesn't say anything to Thomas. She's probably just buttering him up because he's a man. Pathetic for a chief. Whenever I was in the staff room, I could always hear people bad-mouthing the chief. I was getting wary of hearing it, so I started spending more time chatting with the residents and less time in the staff room. However, being out of the staff room meant my paperwork wasn't progressing at all. I was getting tired of feeling like I didn't have a place at work and my work was not moving forward. That's why I asked her for instructions. What should I do? Is there any work that I can handle? After saying that, I approached the chief on my own. Then, finally, the chief said to me, "All right, then do this," and started to assign tasks to me. But the tasks given to me were things like changing sheets and cleaning the floors. It was obvious that these tasks were not caregiving duties, just odd jobs. Seeing me accepting these tasks from the chief, the Queen Bee staff members started bad-mouthing the chief again behind her back. That chief, she's definitely pandering to men. Changing the work she assigns based on gender and age, she's really a wicked woman. The behind-the-back talk from the Queen Bee staff members was only increasing day by day. I started racking my brain about how I could improve the relationships at work. During such a time, I was called by the chief to the conference room. Did I do something? I couldn't think of anything. Well, it doesn't matter. Since I was called by the chief, I might as well discuss the interpersonal issues as well. As I was walking towards the conference room with various thoughts, I noticed the chief fidgeting with an unusually embarrassed look. When I asked, "Is there something you need from me?" she just kept looking down without saying a word. While I was watching the chief with curiosity, she finally opened her mouth. "I'm sorry for the sudden request, but can you stay at my place for a month next month?" What? I was confused by the sudden, unexpected request from the chief. "I'm going on overseas training, so could you look after my cat for me?" Saying so, the chief handed me her house keys, fidgeting with a bashful look. Ah, so that's what this is about. Although I understood, I felt a strange sense of urgency about this unexpected request from the chief. Why me? Aren't there other people you could ask? When I asked the chief that, she looked at me with a blush and said, "There's no one else I can ask. That's why I'm asking you, Thomas," and gazed intently at me. Looking at the chief's embarrassed, yet serious eyes, I couldn't refuse. "Well, if you're okay with me, I'll do it." As I muttered that, the chief's face lit up all at once. "Really? Well, I'm counting on you next month then," she said, "now, back to work," and walked out of the meeting room with a spring in her step. I could only stand there, dumbfounded, watching the cheerful figure of the chief retreat. No matter if she didn't have anyone else to ask, why me? I'm not particularly close to the chief. With those thoughts in mind, I returned to my workspace. It was strange that the chief would entrust all her personal and home matters to me, a mere employee. As I thought about various things, I felt strange about the chief's attitude and had a vague feeling. At the end of the workday, I decided I had to refuse the chief's request and stayed behind in the office. However, the chief was caught up in preparing for her overseas training. She was discussing the training with the office staff, receiving explanations about the flow of the day, meeting up with the translator, and so on. In our nursing home, there is an annual overseas training program for caregivers, nurses, and dietitians. They visit countries known for their advanced welfare systems, like Sweden, Denmark, and New Zealand. to observe and learn about their caregiving techniques in local hospitals and elderly homes. Usually, experienced employees attend to reflect on their usual caregiving tasks. But it seems that they couldn't gather participants this year. And apparently, the caregiver who was supposed to go suddenly couldn't make it due to a family matter. It was understandable then that the chief, who had recently transferred, was suddenly set to go on overseas training next month. As the chief busied herself with preparations for the overseas training, a month passed without me being able to say a word. The spare key she had given me still remained in my bag. The day before the chief's overseas training. Is she really going tomorrow? As I stared at the key I had received from the chief and thought about various things, the chief, who was about to go on her overseas training the next day, called out to me, "Could you drop by my place after work today? From tomorrow, I'll be relying on you to take care of my home daily." Upon hearing the chief's voice, I ended up having dinner at the chief's house after work that day. For some reason, although I should be visiting the chief's house for the first time, the apartment building seemed vaguely familiar. I thought about it for a while, but in the end, I couldn't remember anything, and with a feeling of unease, I entered the chief's home. As soon as I stepped into the chief's home, something black flew across in front of me. What? As I stood there in surprise, the cat, which had been on top of the cat tower until a moment ago, dashed into the depths of the room with great speed. She's incredibly shy around people. She's never let any visitors touch her. The chief explained this while putting down her bag, donning an apron, and starting to prepare dinner. Wait a minute, I've never owned a cat before. There's no way I can take care of one that's so timid. When I voiced my concerns, the chief waved me over to the kitchen and said, "Come over here." She then proceeded to teach me about the proportions and timing for preparing cat food and water. She even showed me how to clean the litter box. But even if I understand how to take care of her, I don't think I'll be able to bond with her. When I voiced this concern with a sigh, the chief responded, "You don't have to force yourself to get along with her. Just make sure you feed her and take care of the litter box. That's all you need to do." I was overwhelmed by the chief and reluctantly said, "I understand. I learned only the basics of cat care from her." Then, the chief hastily cooked dinner for me and left early the next morning for an overseas training program. The next day, I continued with my regular work as usual. Today, as well, I was busy with work, and before I knew it, it was past the regular time. "Oh, no, I have to take care of the cat," I exclaimed and quickly stood up, hastily clocked out, and headed towards Chief's house. When I arrived at the house, a swift black figure dashed past me. Looking up, I saw a cat tower next to the front door, and from it, the cat jumped down and fled into the room. Is it okay to jump down from such a high place? If this continues, she'll eventually get hurt. Saying so, I went into the room to replenish the cat's food and clean the litter box. As I did this, the cat was watching me intently through a gap in the sliding door of the bedroom. Come to think of it, I hadn't asked the chief for the cat's name. I took the liberty of naming her Fluffy and tried to beckon her over, but the cat hissed in intimidation. I worried that this situation might be causing the kitty some stress. I said to her, "I'm going home now, make sure you eat your food," and left Chief's house. For about a week, I went over to Chief's place daily. The cat seemed to find it strange that I, a stranger, not its owner, was visiting the house every day to feed it and clean its litter box. Slowly, she started venturing out from behind the sliding door of the bedroom, tentatively sniffing my bag. However, she would jolt and retreat back to the bedroom whenever I moved. Despite this, I felt like I was gradually closing the distance with the cat. In order not to startle her, I'd carefully place a treat in front of her, keeping my movements to a minimum. Then, even though she'd contemplate returning to the bedroom for a moment, she'd sniff at the treat and take a bite. With such persistent efforts, the cat started to come near me. She would sniff the hem of my clothes, back hunched in caution. She would surely bolt at an incredible speed if I made any sudden move. I was unable to move, frozen in place for several minutes. But today, I started work early at 7 a.m. and worked overtime. I ended up missing my lunch break and was famished. I desperately wanted to eat something, but I couldn't move. My hunger eventually won over, and I decided to move slowly. The chief had previously told me, "You can eat anything you find in the house." I got up as if in slow motion and went to the kitchen. Then, I opened the refrigerator and scanned its contents just with my eyes. For some reason, the cat did not run away, but slowly followed me, then just sat there watching me. I couldn't figure out what to eat, so I pulled out a fruit jelly that the chief had bought and placed it on the table. The cat, from under the table, looked up at me curiously as I sat there eating the fruit jelly for dinner. With all of this going on, I naturally became closer to the cat, and before I knew it, she didn't run away even when I touched her. In fact, she began to rub against me and purr. I had no idea why I was so favored, and of course, I couldn't ask the cat. I was filled with a sense of wonder, as I'd never touched a cat before. I was fascinated by how soft and comforting the cat was. Without realizing it, playing with Chief's cat had become my only source of comfort after a hard day's work. Today marks the final day of the Chief's overseas business trip. As always, I looked forward to playing with the cat and headed over to her house. Unusually, the cat was waiting for me at the entrance. "Ah, a welcome party, thank you," I said to the cat, giving it a scratch. As I was doing so, I felt something odd on my hand. What's this? Was this here before?" I thought to myself, feeling the cat's belly once again, and there it was, a lump, small like a marble. I don't know anything about cats, but the thought of the cat being sick filled me with anxiety. In a panic, I looked for a 24/7 veterinary clinic and rushed there. To my surprise, the vet's eyes widened in shock. "This seems to be a skin tumor. At this size, it would be very difficult to find unless you're frequently touching and checking the cat's body. Good find," he said. With a reassuring smile, he continued, "Given the small size, we can likely remove it completely with immediate surgery. We'll have to look at the pathology report for certainty, but we should schedule the surgery as soon as possible." Despite being a popular clinic with a 1-month waiting list for surgeries, it turned out there had been a recent cancellation, so I could book the surgery. I scheduled the surgery right there, and given my worry about the cat, I decided to stay at Chief's house for the night. This house, it felt familiar somehow, but it wasn't a place I knew. With that thought nagging at me, I laid down on the living room couch, petting the cat until, before I knew it, I fell asleep. The following day, the chief returned from her overseas training. "Was everything okay? Did anything happen?" The chief rushed over to me with a worried look. "I'm fine, but..." I stammered, then told her about the cat's illness. "What, you noticed that?" The chief was surprised that the cat, who usually didn't let anyone else touch it, allowed me to pet it daily. After her overseas training, she returned to a whirlwind of preparing for a presentation at a meeting and arranging for the cat's surgery. The cat's surgery, which I was worried about, was a success. The results of the pathological examination revealed that it was a malignant tumor. However, because it was discovered early, The cancer was completely removed, and the possibility of metastasis was considered very low. When she finally had a moment of calm, she wanted to thank me again, and I was invited to her house. As soon as I arrived at her house, the cat, with its eyes shining, approached me with its tail up. Watching me and the cat, who kept rubbing up against me fervently, the chief started to speak. "You've always been such a perfect gentleman, even back then. I can see why my sister and the cat chose you." I widened my eyes and asked, "What do you mean?" But as I looked at her face, I remembered something. I was always a bit more mature than my classmates in elementary school, partly due to my physical build. I know it might sound weird to say this, but I was a bit of a heartthrob and was quietly popular among the girls. In the 6th grade, I became an official couple with my first love, and our relationship lasted until middle school. Looking at us, her sister would watch us with an envious look, like "You guys are lucky." Could it be? "You're the sister of my first love." When I said that to the chief, he laughed with a bright smile and said, "Did you just notice?" Then, she told me a story. After my first love and I broke up in middle school, her parents divorced, her sister went to live with their mother, and the chief went with their father. Their father passed away from cancer a few years ago. She hasn't been able to get in touch with her sister or her mother. Feeling left behind and lonely, Kay started keeping a cat a few years ago. This house is actually her childhood home, but it's changed a lot recently as the area has been developed into a new residential area. The apartment was also renovated, which is why I didn't recognize it. To distract herself from her loneliness, she had been putting on a brave face at work. And then, she was transferred to my apartment, and we were reunited. I secretly had a crush on you as I watched how seriously you cared about my sister. Saying that, the chief smiled shyly. Unlike when she was at work, she had a really kind and cute atmosphere. I felt an electric shock course through me, blindsided by this unexpected revelation of our past connection. From that moment, I found myself frequently visiting her house to see the cat. "You've done so much for the cat. It's gotten much better thanks to you. I can't thank you enough." She'd repeatedly expressed her gratitude, to which I replied that I wanted something in return. When she asked what I wanted, without missing a beat, I pointed towards the entrance hall and said, "I'll take that." She looked confused until I held up the spare keys to her house. This is what I meant. Understanding dawned on her and her cheeks flushed a sweet pink. She was so cute that I hugged her. From that day on, our relationship officially started. "Just keep it quiet at work, okay?" she asked shyly. I noticed a softening in her personality since we started dating. Hasn't the chief been particularly nice to us lately? Maybe something good happened. Has she got a boyfriend now? As I watched her laugh off the remarks from the Queen Bee staff, I felt a sense of relief and couldn't help but smirk. I hope you enjoyed the story. Subscribing to the channel can be a great motivation for us. See you in the next video. I swear, I didn't mean to peek on purpose. The normally shut window was open, and the curtains were enticingly swaying in the breeze. I found myself looking into the depths of the window. And there she was, a woman of incredible beauty like I'd never seen before. I couldn't look away, I was completely frozen. My name is Scott Thompson, a 32-year-old salesman. I work at a real estate agency in the sales department. I feel like it's more appropriate to say that I used to be in sales. Not to brag, but I was an excellent salesman. I've been awarded as the top seller at the company headquarters more than once. I think I became complacent, believing that I'd continue down the path of success, A month ago, my fall into the pit came unexpectedly. In the morning, my colleague suddenly fell ill and asked me to stand in for an afternoon property showing appointment he had. The one who fell ill was my peer, Bob Miller. Bob's flashy appearance was his trademark, and honestly, I couldn't like him. He had a tendency to pick on me for some reason. But Bob asked me for a favor humbly, so I thought I had no choice but to accept. The client for the property showing was a woman in her late 40s. I wanted to send a female colleague to accompany her, but everyone was booked. The woman wished to see a recently built high-rise condo. It was a big contract worth nearly $2 million. Because she was Bob's client, I had to be extremely careful in guiding her. The last thing I wanted was for Bob to complain about not closing the deal because of me. I meticulously guided her through each room. She seemed distant, as if she was not really listening to my explanations. Just when I thought this was a lost cause, she suddenly put her arms around my neck, freezing me in place. The woman seductively grinned at me. This was a bad situation. "Would you like to play a little?" she asked, making my back run cold. She rubbed her soft body against mine, and I couldn't move. I wanted to remove her forcefully, but she was a client. While trying to figure out how to peacefully resolve the situation, the door suddenly opened. The person who stormed in was my boss, the department manager. His face was bright red with anger. He forcefully separated the woman and me. "Scott, what the hell are you doing with my wife? I'll be reporting this to the top boss." He yelled at me one-sidedly, and I stood there, dumbfounded. Apparently, the woman was the manager's wife. There had been rumors that they were living apart. The wife who had seduced me chuckled, saying "busted." A few hours later, I was called into the director's office. The manager had reported me for trying to seduce a client and act indecently. Although I wanted to correct several parts of his report, the atmosphere didn't allow for excuses. The manager, still red in the face, was fuming with rage, and the director was looking at me as if I was garbage. Apparently, the manager reported that I had won all my previous contracts through similar unethical means. As a result, I was reassigned to a branch office in a rural town. I was essentially demoted. When I went back to my desk to receive the reassignment notice, I found Bob grinning smugly. I realized then that I had been set up. But it was too late. I silently packed up my personal belongings and left the main office. Since my reassignment to the small-town branch office, I've been so idle. I feel like I'm rotting. The town where I was transferred is near the sea, much like a small rural town, and there's hardly any work. Young people have moved to the cities, leading to an increase in the population. I remembered that at a previous meeting at headquarters, there had been a discussion on whether to shut down this branch. "Isn't it boring, Scott? This place is just so quiet." There were no customers at the branch, and there was nowhere to do business. Every day, I was playing with the necessary paperwork. The only good thing about being transferred to this branch was that my living space had become larger. They had me using a family-sized apartment instead of a cramped city condo. It might just be big for the sake of being big, but I liked that I had room to stretch out. The day after I mentioned to the branch manager that pets were allowed, I found a box of kittens meowing on my desk when I arrived at work. I had an idea of who might be responsible, but I thought it might be a pleasant distraction, so I decided to keep them. To my surprise, the next morning my desk was stocked with a cat bed, kitten food, and canned goods. I couldn't help but smile. My colleagues were secretly watching me. I began to think it was silly to keep a stern face all the time. Gradually, I got used to the laid-back atmosphere of the branch, my colleagues, in this town. That day was a Sunday. The branch was open, but I was off. Since I started keeping kittens, I can't smoke indoors. I made a smoking area on the balcony. As usual, I leaned against the railing of the balcony and lit a cigarette. I could see the sparkling sea across the roofs. It was so bright, I had to lower my gaze. Next to my apartment was a two-story building. The usually closed corner room's window was open, the curtains swaying in the wind. I realized it was my first weekend since coming to this town. I guess the person in the corner room also had the day off. It felt rude to stare too much. Just as I was about to turn my gaze back to the sea, my eyes were drawn to the corner room's window. A young woman was in the midst of getting changed behind the fluttering curtain. I knew I shouldn't look, but it was hard to look away. I dropped the ash from my cigarette onto the back of my hand and let out an ouch. She looked at me. The moment our eyes met, she glared at me with a crazy expression. While I was taken aback by that, the window was closed roughly. Normally, I'd expect a or something like that, but she just glared at me without letting out a single scream. I felt a sudden urge to laugh. I couldn't hold back and started laughing. The window flew open again. "Don't laugh, just you wait and see," she yelled at me, and the window was closed again. Immediately after, the sound of footsteps echoed running down the outside stairs of the apartment. "Wait, really? Is she coming here?" I rushed from the balcony towards the entrance. I heard the elevator arriving through the door. I could hear the footsteps approaching. I steeled myself and waited for the doorbell to ring. The footsteps stopped. "Come out, hey," she yelled as I opened the front door with resignation. Then, I froze for a moment. She had mistakenly rung the doorbell of the next room. We looked at each other, both letting out an eh. The next moment, the next door neighbor, a full-figured lady, opened the door saying, "Yes, yes." The Chihuahua suddenly darted out and barked at her. She snapped back to reality and profusely apologized for accidentally entering the wrong room, while the Chihuahua continued to bark at her. I also instinctively bowed my head and said I'm sorry. The lady retrieved the Chihuahua and closed the door. "Don't make that mistake again. It's bothersome," I said to her, who was standing frozen in the suddenly quiet hallway. She glared at me, looking relieved that the commotion was over. She then marched straight into my room. She walked to the center of the room, spun around, and sharply pointed at me. "You saw it, didn't you, my thing?" That irritated me a little. It was like an accident. "I didn't see anything. What are you talking about?" I tried to argue that I hadn't been looking. I just happened to see. "Huh? What did you see?" This. While saying that, she pulled at the collar of her t-shirt to reveal her chest. A glimpse of her blue underwear was visible. "Hey, stop that, it's showing." Not wanting to compound the situation, I hurriedly moved away from her. She continued to flaunt her chest and accuse me, as if chasing me. "You saw it." "I saw it, or rather, it was in sight. I'm sorry, but I swear I didn't intentionally." Before I could finish my sentence, a slap from her landed on my cheek. My first encounter with her was quite intense. "Hey Scott, let's go grab lunch. It's my treat." Around lunchtime on next day, branch manager proposed. I nodded while I applied a cooling pad that my boss had given me to my slapped cheek. The place he took me to was a small cafe near the coast. I had passed by it before, but never entered. Branch manager, who is seemingly irregular, ordered the usual lunch for two at the counter. "Sure, 2 lunches. Take a seat wherever you like." The person who responded from behind the counter was the very woman who had slapped me the day before. She widened her eyes even further when she saw me standing next to the branch manager. I raised my hand in a somewhat awkward greeting. "Hi." "What are you saying, you peeper?" A torrent of abuse made me flinch. Branch manager casually said, "Oh, you peeped," and laughed. Left with no ground to stand on, I could only shrink back. In the end, I sat next to my boss at the counter, receiving her glare as we had lunch. When branch manager asked her if something happened, she explained what had happened yesterday. Not wanting to prolong the situation, I silently listened to their conversation. She complained about me to the branch manager. I was worried about how he would react, but he just seemed to find the whole thing amusing. He's a womanizer, no need for him to peep. I was shocked at branch manager's words. "What do you mean?" she asked eagerly. Branch manager started laughing as he told her why I was transferred. She burst into laughter, saying seriously. I was surprised by her reaction. I thought she would assume the worst of me and despise me, but she laughed and said, "You had some bad luck, huh?" As we were chatting excitedly at the counter, the cafe door opened, and in came men who were clearly not locals. She furrowed her brows by the sight of them. The manager was having a conversation with those men. They didn't seem to have come to the cafe to enjoy coffee. The manager received some documents and then sent the men away. Immediately, the manager threw the documents into the trash bin. "Hey, what was that all about?" I decided to ask her. "They've started coming around recently," she replied. "Apparently, they are real estate agents who have been aggressively buying a property in this area. Of course, they have nothing to do with our company." The company name she mentioned is indeed not well regarded in the industry. "It seems they're asking if we're willing to sell this place too," she said with a sigh. "Land speculation has a bad reputation, but it's part of the real estate business. There's nothing wrong with it if transactions are made at a fair price and with mutual consent. If you could sell at a high price, wouldn't it be okay to relocate somewhere else?" I suggested. As a business, this place seemed somewhat lonely. Even at lunchtime, there were only us as customers. I thought that relocating and finding a more profitable location could be an option. But she reacted angrily and raised her eyebrows. "Don't make reckless comments without understanding the value of this community. If you call yourself a local real estate agent, then understand more about this community." She lashed out and then disappeared into the back room. "I'm sorry about that. She's really passionate about our local community. She is called Kathy. Don't take it too hard, alright? Keep on hanging out with us." He quietly served us another round of coffee. From that day, I established a new habit. Instead of going straight home from work, I decided to take a slow walk around the neighborhood. Kathy's words about the local love had been a stimulus. I had been downhearted since my demotion, but her words became a source of motivation. When I took the time to walk, I discovered many new things. While it was said that there weren't many young people, I noticed that there were many young newcomers. Most of them seemed to have migrated here, attracted by the ocean. I'm not a morning person and had never seen the morning sea. I was invited to the beach before going to work by a young man who had moved from the city and opened a pub. There was a local beach that I had not known. At the time when the sun was about to rise, there were people waiting for the waves on their surfboards. I had never surfed, so I was surprised to see people surfing so early in the morning. With my heart pounding, I went down to the sandy beach to watch the scene. While observing them, I noticed that there were proper rules. Only one person could ride a wave at a time. There seemed to be some priority order, and they were giving way to each other. It was surprising. I had imagined it to be a more rough sport, but it wasn't. "What are you doing?" I turned around by the voice, and it was Kathy. In her hands, she had a large beadboard and flippers. "Good morning, what's that?" I pointed at the large beadboard and asked. Kathy put her flippers on the sand and sat down next to me. Then she showed me the large beadboard. Unlike a normal beadboard, it had some kind of rope attached. At the end of the rope, there was something like a wristband. "It's a bodyboard. Haven't you seen one before?" She was dressed in a short-sleeved, three-quarter-length sweatsuit. Probably she is about to hit the waves. I learned that bodyboarding is a sport different from surfing. You ride the waves by laying your upper body on the board. You wear flippers on your feet, also known as fins, to help you navigate in the water. Everything was so new, and I had many questions. She explained it all patiently while doing her warm-up stretches. I learned that the waves are better in the morning, and that there are specific times when the waves appear and disappear. Why not give it a try, Scott? It's a waste not to. Living so close to the sea, make the best of your move, she teased as she put on her fins and stood up. She connected a leash, a cord that attaches the board to her wrist, and she was ready to go. With her fins on, she started walking backward into the sea, keeping her gaze on me. She looked sort of cute, like a penguin. Our eyes met and she gave me a big, joyful wave. When the water reached her waist, she turned around and started moving over the waves toward the horizon. I feared she might flip over when a big wave came, but she knew what she was doing. She built up some speed and dove under the wave with her board. I later found out this move is called a dolphin dive. She passed a few waves before reaching the waiting point where the best waves roll in. She sat on her board, waving at me. When a wave came, she'd speed up and ride it. She looked like she was flying as she slid down the large waves diagonally. After almost an hour in the water, she returned to the shore with a satisfied look on her face. The other surfers were also making their way back to land. Much to my surprise, they greeted me as each one passed by me. It was a small gesture, but it made me feel warm inside. Some of them had tattoos peeking out from under their wetsuits. Despite the variety, everyone was so friendly it was almost surprising. Cass V2 had taken off the upper part of her wetsuit. Her vivid blue bikini gave me a small startle, but the next moment I realized something and I couldn't help but voice it out loud. "Ah, you were wearing a swimsuit that time, weren't you? It wasn't underwear after all." The underwear I thought I saw her in was actually her swimsuit. No wonder she didn't mind my seeing it. Kathy snorted with laughter. I felt a bit like I'd lost somehow, but I also felt surprisingly refreshed. "This is a nice town." As I said this, squinting at the glittering sea, she gave me a happy smile and extended a welcoming hand. "Welcome." Her hand was still slightly cool from the water as I shook it. From that day on, I started waking up early to go to the beach. I would have loved to try surfing, but sadly, I can't swim. I was told that I'd float if I wore a wetsuit, but the idea of going into the sea was still a bit scary. I also started going to the cafe where Kathy works for lunch every day. I got to know the local shopkeepers, and I started hanging out more often with the young people who had moved here. As I started to blend into the local scene, I started hearing more and more about the land sharks. They seemed to be pushing their agenda quite aggressively. It felt like something big was in motion, and it didn't feel right. Then, one day, my hunch proved right. On my way to work, a black luxury car sped past me. I caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the window. It was Bob, the man who had set me up. I hadn't heard anything about Bob quitting his job. He's up to something with another real estate agency, doing things his own way, It's bound to be some shady business if he's moving in secret. I contacted a friend at the main office as soon as I got to work. According to my friend, Bob is apparently on annual leave today. Recently, he's been having a lot of unexplained absences, and his lifestyle has noticeably become more extravagant. I ask about his sales performance. Right now, in my absence, it seems that Bob is the top in sales. But my friend says there's something fishy about his sales. He suspects Bob might be making deals with some dangerous parties. Maybe that's the source of his flashy lifestyle. During lunch, I dropped by the usual cafe, expecting to see Kathy. As soon as I entered the cafe, I let out a "oh." The department manager's wife, the one who caused my demotion, was elegantly sipping coffee at the counter. She noticed me frozen at the entrance and gave me a soft smile. With a silent gesture from her beige manicured finger, she indicated for me to sit next to her. Reluctantly, I sat down next to her. "Why are you here? It was your fault that..." Once I verbalized it, I felt a surge of forgotten anger. She raised a finger to my lips as I was about to raise my voice and said, "Be quiet. I'm sorry about that time. I lost to the terms of exchange. I didn't mean to ruin your career." Her apologetic smile cools my rising anger. Somehow, I can't bring myself to dislike this woman, and it troubles me. I look down without being able to say anything, and she starts telling me the whole truth. It seems that Bob reached out to her when she was desperate to get a divorce. He offered her money to frame me. She agreed because she needed the money for her life after the divorce. Bob had been terribly bad-mouthing me, saying I was a hindrance to his future work. "Why are you telling me all this now?" "Because the money hasn't been transferred. It means the contract is void, right?" It made sense. Moreover, she apparently investigated Bob out of spite. She spread out his investigation report in front of me. I quickly read through the report. It appeared that Bob had connections with some dangerous people. He seemed to be assisting them in contracting real estate properties. I realized that the one hunting all the local real estate was planning to establish a dedicated real estate company. I couldn't help but admire the scale of the plan. However, I couldn't accept the idea of this area being dominated by these dangerous parties, as per Bob's plan. "How much will you pay for this?" She tilted her head and peeked into my face. Her long eyelashes sparkled with a bit of glitter. I had no idea how much to offer. "How much do you think?" Timidly I asked her, and she replied with a small smile. "How about you treat me to a cup of coffee?" In front of my stunned eyes, she raised her empty coffee cup and said so. In the evening, I was alone in the office, thoroughly examining the investigation report on Bob I had received from her. I wrote a report to the headquarters within the night and sent it by email. The headquarters would surely be in turmoil by tomorrow morning. Relations with dangerous people would seriously harm the company's reputation. As I expected, I received a call from the headquarters, and the next day, I was asked to go to the headquarters. I found myself looking up at the headquarters building after a long time. I thought I might feel more nostalgic, but no such emotion arose. All I could think was the sky seems narrower here. As soon as I used my employee ID to enter the building, someone rushed towards me. It was the department manager who orchestrated my transfer. The department manager grabbed me by the collar and gruffly asked, "What are you doing here?" I may have been transferred to a branch office, but I'm still an employee of this company. I have business at headquarters. In the lobby, the manager and I glared at each other for a moment. The president's secretary interrupted us. I was instructed to go to the president's office immediately, and I shook off the department manager. The department manager was told to come along as well. Upon entering the president's office, I saw Bob standing there with a pale face. The department manager looked uneasy and sure of what's going on. The president said to me, "I read your report." On the desk were not only my report, but also a large number of documents and photos. They must have investigated this yesterday. These were likely proof of Bob's misconduct. The manager turned pale as looking at the photos of Bob conducting business meetings with disreputable individuals. A subordinate's misconduct reflected poorly on his superior's lack of oversight. I was hoping they'd both get kicked out due to collective responsibility. The verdict handed down by the president was that Bob was fired and the department manager was demoted. I later learned that most of Bob's sales were contracts with shady partners. We should be able to cancel the purchase contracts according to our internal regulations, but it will be a difficult task to negotiate each one individually. I can only hope that everyone at headquarters will pull together and work hard. Bob, having received his termination notice, left the room with a pale face. The president said to me, "Come back to the headquarters." He wanted me to perform as I used to, as the top salesman. That's the future I originally hoped for, but I felt a sense of unease. I stayed silent, unable to give an immediate answer. The president seemed to be waiting for my reply. My eyes were drawn to the large window behind the president. It was a sunny day and the sunlight was pouring in. But still, when I returned to the branch office, the sun had set and it was well past business hours. I figured everyone must have gone home by now, but the office windows were brightly lit. I was surprised to see people working overtime, which was unusual. As I opened the door, a party popper went off unexpectedly. The popping sound startled me, and I shrieked back. As I stood there, covered in thin paper strips, I was at a loss for words. "Congratulations on your return to the headquarters, back on the fast track." The office was filled with my branch colleagues, the branch manager, the president of the shopping district, and some surfers I know. When I said you'd probably be returning to the headquarters, everyone came. "You're really loved, huh?" said the branch manager, wearing a party hat. Some people were already teary-eyed at his words. "It's taken for granted that I'm leaving this branch. I heard you used to be the top salesman. I had no idea. You're not someone who should be wasting away in a place like this," said Kathy with a slightly sad smile, causing a pang in my chest. "You know, I turned down the offer to return to the headquarters." At my words, everyone made a bewildered face. Seeing their expressions, I felt somewhat guilty. I felt like I've let them down. Why? What about your promotion?" Kathy, as if representing the whole group, bombarded me with questions. After a brief thought, I just repeated what I had told the president. "The city's too cramped, it's suffocating, and there's no sea. I want to learn to swim." With a look of disbelief, Kathy hugged me. I whispered something only Kathy could hear. "And you wouldn't be there." There was no reply from Kathy, but I knew what she was feeling from the tight grip on my arm. I thought my decision was not wrong at all. Early next morning, I stared at the sea from the sandy beach as usual. Next to me, Kathy was preparing to go into the sea. She narrowed her eyes, checking the waves. And as I watched her profile, Kathy glanced at me. "Weren't you the one who wanted to learn to swim?" She seemed unsatisfied that I wasn't going in with her. I wanted to learn to swim, but I didn't even have a swimsuit. When I told her I need to get the gear first, Kathy chuckled. "Just swim in your shorts." I've been thinking, "Do you want to get married?" Kathy froze at my words. Ever since I met her, she's always been full of surprises. But this time, I wanted to surprise her, and I succeeded. I smiled to myself, looking at frozen Kathy. Coming back to her senses, she gave a chuckle looking at my grin, and clicked her tongue. "I'm not marrying a non-swimmer," she turned her head away and declared loudly. Then, in a much smaller voice, she added, "If you learn to swim, I'll consider it." Her teasing wasn't something new. "And when did you start liking me?" Before I could finish my line, I was hit with a bodyboard. "Stop getting ahead of yourself. Go back to HQ." After seeing my, with that parting shot, Kathy ran towards the sea. She went up to the water's edge, then turned back. She must have realized she'd forgotten her flippers. When I held them out, she snatched them away. And as she put on the flippers at the water's edge, she turned and gave me a big wave. "The ring better be a diamond, not a birthstone." At Kathy's words, I made a big circle with both my hands. With her, I could even get into the sea without fear. I wish I could tell the dejected me from when I first arrived in this town, being transferred from the HQ. "You're going to find the greatest treasure in this town." For now, I guess I should thank Goddess of Fate. Even now I've turned 30, I sometimes dream about something. I had the same dream again tonight. I know, this is just a dream. In the dream, it happened in a high school hallway. During break time, I was goofing around with my friends. The one passing by was my rival, the only one I couldn't beat in grades or character. I'm responding to a classmate who approaches me with a gentle expression. His confident demeanor was annoying. My friend took advantage of my distraction with her and tripped me up saying, "Gotcha." As I was about to fall, I reflexively grabbed something. It was a sensation like nothing I'd ever felt before. It was soft, warm, and too big to fit in my hand. It took me a few seconds to realize what I had grabbed was her. Well, it was her boob. "I'm sorry." I apologized hurriedly, but she calmly said, "It's not worth an apology." I'm still curious about the meaning of her words. That's why I keep having this dream. I let out a small sigh as I woke up to the alarm clock. My name is David Miller, and I'm turning 30 this year. I got a job at a well-known company right after graduating from university. I was assigned to the system management department. It's a department that takes on the entire system management for the company. The work is rewarding, and I also got a beautiful girlfriend. My perfect life isn't something that just started recently. I was perfect from the moment I was born. Born into an old family, I was raised without any hardship. From the time I became aware of the world around me, I was told that I was handsome, excellent in school, athletic, and tall. Throughout elementary and middle school, I was hailed as a prodigy. It can't be helped that I misunderstood that I was highly competent because of how I was raised. In fact, I was a person with no faults. However, a turning point came when I entered high school. For the first time, I met someone who I might lose to. She is the honor student Thoroughly. She was excellent not only academically, but also athletically. The big difference between her and me was her popularity. Unlike me, who was immature in character, she was already complete. There was hardly anyone who disliked her in school. She always had a gentle expression on her face. I was not good at her. Her name was Ashley Brown. She always had her shoulder-length hair tied back in one. I still vividly remember the pleasant smell of her shampoo whenever she walked by. When I found out she was applying to the same college as me, my competitive spirit ignited like never before. The college we were aspiring to was among the most challenging. I swore to myself that I would make up for all the times I'd lost in the past right here. Swearing to myself, I hit the books like never before. I was so relentless in my studies, not allowing myself a single mistake, that my parents would worry and suggest, "How about taking a break?" Once, she spoke to me after she found out we were applying to the same college. "David, I heard you're applying to the same college. Let's do this together." I felt embarrassed when she flashed me her sparkling smile. She said she brought some candy, and she left a strawberry-flavored one on my desk before she returned to her own seat and looked out the window. There was a hint of melancholy on her side profile. I think this was about 3 days before the exam. On the day of the exam, I searched for her at the test center. Since we had all applied together from school, our candidate numbers should have been close. Proof of this was that my other friends had close candidate numbers. The seat 3 in front of me was empty. It was probably her seat. At first, I thought she was just running late. I was so concerned about her empty seat that, honestly, I couldn't concentrate on the exam. As a result, I couldn't focus on the exam and my college entrance exam ended. Of course, I passed. My desperate study for the entrance exam didn't let me down. But I felt betrayed by something more important. I never saw her again after that. She didn't show up at the graduation ceremony either. There were rumors that her father's company had been scammed and gone bankrupt. Apparently, they had left town in the dead of night, almost like they were on the run. She couldn't even think about college entrance exam. She must have noticed the situation of her family. I think the melancholy on her face as she looked out the window was because she knew that her happy student life was ending. Our paths would never cross again. I remember feeling incredibly lonely after the graduation ceremony, looking at her empty seat where no one sat. My life as a working adult has been smooth sailing. I stood head and shoulders above my peers and kept getting promoted. It felt easier than my student days, almost like a game. There was no one in the company who could compete with me. I think that's why I grew into an adult who completely took life for granted. I also got a girlfriend. Lily, known as the most beautiful woman in the office. She joined the company 2 years after me. From the moment I first saw her, I decided that she was the one for me. I wooed her on the day of the welcome party for the new employees, and we quickly started dating. I am thinking of getting married in the future, but lately, she's been pressuring me to get married, and I'm a bit taken aback. Around this time, it was decided that the company's system would be completely revamped. After a series of competitive presentations, we finally decided on who we would hire to set up our system. It was not a large corporation, but a small IT company. Though small, the company outshined its competitors in their presentation. Apparently, they have a real hotshot system engineer. The representative of the company, a man named Stanley, showed up for our first meeting. He was a rather attractive man with a cool vibe, so much so that the women in our team were quite smitten. And the guy was good at his job. During the meeting, I was constantly amazed at how fast he could think so quickly. He said he would bring the person in charge for the next meeting, and that was the end of our first encounter. I assumed the person in charge would be the ace system engineer. I was excited to meet this person. They were apparently the same age as me, 30. I was excited, feeling like I was about to meet a worthy rival after a long time. The excitement was the same kind I felt when I was competing with Ashley Brown during our college days. When I saw who was coming to the meeting that I had been waiting for, I was so surprised, I thought my jaw was going to drop. I'm the person in charge, Ashley Brown. The person who showed up at the second meeting was her, the one who disappeared on the day of our college entrance exam. There was still a resemblance, but she was not the honor student she used to be. Her very short hair was dyed silver, and there were several piercings. The calm, gentle expression that was always on her face was gone. Oh, hi Miller, in charge of system management. We greeted each other as if we were meeting for the first time. When I handed her my business card, she took it politely. I don't have a business card because I'm a contractor, I'm sorry. Apparently, she was not a full-time employee. She introduced herself as a freelance system engineer. Stanley had asked her to work at his company. The meeting went unbelievably smoothly. She presented a flawless system proposal, and I couldn't find anything to question. Above all, her explanations were concise and easy to understand, appealing to people's senses. Even the bosses who weren't familiar with system could understand everything from her explanation, so I didn't need to add anything. It was a meeting that would usually take twice as long, but it ended before we knew it. Stanley always said that shorter meetings were better. After confirming a few points about future meetings with Stanley, we called it a day. As Ashley was packing up her laptop, I gathered up my courage to speak to her. I was nervous, thinking what if I was mistaken. "Do you remember me?" I asked. At my words, she seemed to smile a bit. "I remember. You've done well, David. I heard you were in charge of system." The last time we exchanged words was back in high school, and it felt strange to be talking to her again as adults. "What have you been up to since then? You gave up on your exam too." My words came out more accusatory than I intended. This was my only acknowledged rival. Her sudden disappearance left me feeling betrayed, and I couldn't shake that off. It was a story from more than 10 years ago. Surely she must be annoyed being blamed for something so far back. Just as I expected, she knitted her brows with a look of annoyance. It was a facial expression I'd never seen before. "What I've been up to since then is none of your business, isn't it, David? You really have no tact." I was infuriated by her dismissive tone. "What the hell? The nerve of you. I'm just worried about you." I unintentionally raised my voice. "Is something wrong, Mr. Stanley approached. I didn't know what to say. "What do you want to know, Miller? About my college situation? I couldn't go. I didn't even graduate high school. My highest level of education is middle school. Is that what you wanted to know? I don't need your concern. Don't make fun of me." She glared at me as she stated this clearly. The person I've cared about so much is a middle school dropout. I couldn't accept this reality at once. She was the only one I considered a rival. To be honest, there was even a part of me that admired her. "Don't be ridiculous, Ashley. You've hit rock bottom like that." I knew my words were childish, but all I could do was berate and belittle her. "Education, nonsense. You just have to work your way up with your abilities." Her words left me dumbfounded. I felt like I'd been hit back. It was as if my narrow-mindedness was being held up in front of me. While I was at a loss for words, she left the meeting room quickly. I could see Mr. Stanley whispering something to her. Her slender arm was briefly wrapped around Mr. Stanley's waist in response. Their natural interaction suggested that their relationship was more than just temp and employee. The Ashley Brown I knew no longer existed. In addition to feeling lonely, a strange sense of despair engulfed me. I realized that I had idealized Ashley. Meanwhile, despite my relationship with Ashley, the project was proceeding smoothly. I was gradually getting used to the fact that she was not the person I had idealized. In fact, everything went smoothly with her. She seemed to understand everything I was thinking, and she constantly met my expectations. It felt as if we had been together for many years. "Hey, are you listening to me?" Lily was pouting in dissatisfaction next to me. It seemed she had been absent-mindedly recalling something about Ashley during our cafe date on our day off. Honestly, I wasn't listening to Lily at all. Sorry, I'm just a bit tired from work. I tried to make an innocent excuse with a smile. Lily puffed her cheeks, looking displeased. Lily, who can be a little selfish, dislikes being put in second place. She's the type that won't be satisfied unless she is the top priority. I used to find that adorable, but today it's not charming at all. Hey, about that temp girl, the shady one with silver hair, I heard she dropped out of high school, LOL. Lily chuckled with a snobbish smirk. It seemed to be rumored in office. I've even had coworkers question whether it's okay to trust the main system to a high school dropout. Each time, I had to hold back my rising anger. I never thought that my girlfriend would say the same thing. It doesn't really matter once you're in the real world, right? If you've got the talent and the skills, that's what matters, I retorted. I had no intention of defending Ashley, but it came out sounding like I was. Lily didn't like that. She didn't like that I disagreed with her opinion. What, have you been charmed by her too, David? Weren't you the one saying anyone without a college degree is trash at the company? Come to think of it, there was a time when I said something like that. Now I realize how arrogant and foolish I was. In fact, high school dropout Ashley is still a few steps ahead of me. Apparently, she even dated Stanley. She eats men up and throws them away at her assignments, LOL. I couldn't hold back my anger at Lily's contemptuous remarks. What the hell do you know about Ashley? You happily spreading such vulgar rumors, you're the worst, I snapped. Normally, I don't raise my voice. Lily was taken aback. We rarely had fights since we started dating. But I just couldn't stand it when Lily made fun of Ashley. Why do I have to be scolded? Did I say something wrong? Lily's face, teary-eyed and glaring at me, looked disgustingly ugly. She might have not meant to be bad. I probably shared the same mindset with her all along. Sorry to interrupt. Isn't it a waste of time to fight over me? Suddenly, we were surprised by Ashley's voice coming from behind. She seemed to have been working at the cafe counter. She had her hoodie up, so I didn't notice Ashley at all. Come to think of it, this cafe is near Ashley's workplace. We were the ones stepping into Ashley's territory. I just told the truth. I didn't do anything wrong. Lily glared at Ashley and, shouting, she bolted from the cafe. All I could do was watch Lily's back as she left. Abandoned in the cafe, Ashley moved over to my table, bringing his laptop with him. Isn't that your girlfriend, David? You're not going to chase her, Ashley said, without taking his eyes off his laptop screen. As she saw our quarrel, I couldn't reply immediately. As I remained silent, Ashley sighed softly. Why did you two argue like that? Well, wasn't that a harsh way to talk about Ashley? You don't know he was a top-notch student with both beauty and brains. Judging him like he's a loser, isn't that awful? I felt strangely flustered as I was being questioned. I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted Lily to understand that I was arguing with her to defend Ashley. But Ashley just stared at me with cold eyes. These were not the calm, bright eyes Ashley had back in our student days. They were unbelievably cold and dark. Do you think I'm happy about what you did? She said, her voice choked with suppressed anger. How can you speak so confidently without knowing anything? That was just for show. Is flaunting your own righteousness a male trait? My homeroom teacher in high school was like that too. It's ridiculous. Ashley began to talk about her past. She pretended to be a straight-A student in order to get a scholarship. Apparently, her family fell apart during middle school, and it seemed like Ashley was the one holding the family together. Of course, going to college was out of the question. Ashley had been aiming for a special scholarship. Considering her grades, she could get a scholarship from any college. She said she wanted to escape from her home as soon as possible. Then, she was called by the homeroom teacher, who had something to discuss. She was told to give her scholarship spot to another student and take the SAT, which made her doubt her ears. The homeroom teacher was smiling, satisfied with his decision. He didn't even notice Ashley, who was in despair right in front of him. Being forced to take the SAT, Ashley worked harder than ever. But all that effort was in vain, as her family had to run away in the middle of the night due to financial difficulties. There was no way she could take the SAT under such circumstances. Hard work pays off, huh? That's the word of those who were rewarded for their efforts. Ashley ended her story with this line. That's why, David, I get annoyed when I see you. You've been blessed since high school and you shine. Honestly, I didn't want to meet you. She slammed her laptop shut, crumpled up the 2 checks, and with a thin smile, Ashley left the cafe after quickly settling the bill, leaving me dumbfounded and at a loss for words. Listening to Ashley's footsteps, I wondered what I did wrong. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like denying my own life. But that would just make me feel miserable. I downed my cold coffee in one gulp. Ever since running into Ashley on a day off at a cafe, her demeanor became even more businesslike than before. I can tell from her attitude that she wants to get this job done and cut ties with me as quickly as possible. Even though I was hurt by her attitude, we carried on with our work in a businesslike manner. Mr. Stanley started to accompany her to meetings that she used to attend alone. There was no chance to speak with her one-on-one anymore. I could tell she was avoiding me completely. Her attitude began to irritate me, and I found it harder to concentrate on my work. To make matters worse, I reached my limit when I saw the two of them getting along so well during meetings. I heard rumors that they've broken up. But even then, seeing her put complete trust in Mr. Stanley stoked my jealousy, and I couldn't stop it. That's when I made a big mistake. It was a communication error about a system specification change. Distracted by the two of them, I made a beginner's mistake. Even though it was a beginner's mistake, a communication error about specification changes could be fatal. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the specification changes during our last meeting. I realized my mistake when I was shown the developed system. As soon as I realized it, I broke out in a cold sweat and my heart began to pound. Mr. Stanley's expression changed quickly when he heard what I said. Even if there's some leeway in the schedule, specification changes are challenging. What do you mean by that at this late stage? Specification changes now. Mr. Stanley, who is always calm, raised his voice. I've been watching my team build this up. I guess it's no surprise that the words at this point are slipping out of my mouth. I bowed my head and apologized many times. We still have some leeway in the schedule, so it should be fine. Please let me check the details of the specification changes. Ashley controlled Mr. Stanley, who had changed color, and said in a quiet voice. I think she tried to prevent my mistake from being known to other colleagues. Ashley laughed a little and said, "We can do it." In the end, all we got was a reply that the delivery date would be just in time. Ashley said, "Don't worry," as she passed me, who couldn't hide my upset at making my first mistake since becoming a working adult. Just before the delivery date, I brought some gifts and went to Ashley's company. The lights were still bright even after work hours. When I rang the doorbell, Mr. Stanley answered. When I handed over the gifts, he smiled happily and said, "Thank you. We've received some gifts." When he called out to the company, Men with unshaven faces appeared one after another and swarmed around the bag of gifts. I'm truly sorry for the inconvenience. To me, who bowed my head, Mr. Stanley said, "It's okay," and smiled. Thanks to Ashley's full support, I think we can make it in time. I heard that Ashley, who took on the specification changes, was blamed by other employees when she brought the changes back to the company. There was probably a criticism, saying, "Now you decide to take on such a reckless task." It was Ashley herself who silenced them. She bowed his head and asked for their support, assuring them that she would follow through on everything and take full responsibility. Ashley is a contract worker. She navigates this industry on her own. She hardly ever fawns over others or rallies on them. And yet, she bowed her head deeply and asked for cooperation. The office quieted down in an instant. Making Ashley bow like that, "David, I'd like you to tell me what kind of relationship you and Ashley have." Stanley, still smiling, spoke those words, but his eyes weren't smiling. I was a little taken aback by his serious gaze. "Well, I got rejected by Ashley. She told me she had someone she's liked since her school days and can't forget him." As he told me this while picking up a sandwich from the catering, I thought my heart was going to stop. "Oh, you went to the same school as Ashley, right? Do you know what kind of guy she liked? She mentioned they were supposed to go to the same college." His teasing made me sit up straighter. I realized he was pushing me forward. She was talking about me." I responded lightly, and Stanley gave me a playful punch in the chest. Pointing to a door in the back, he informed me, "She's napping." Hearing his words, I ran toward the door at the back. Without knocking, I opened the door to find Ashley, sleeping soundly on the couch. The sound of the door closing made her eyelids twitch slightly. "Shut up." Ashley's voice was scratchy. She seemed even smaller than when I saw her last time. "Ashley, wake up. I have something to ask you." I knelt down near the couch where Ashley was sleeping. She seemed to wake up all at once when she heard my voice. Jumping up, she looked around. Why, David. Pulling her blanket up to her chest, she looked at me, unable to hide her surprise. "Stanley told me, who's this person you can't forget?" Her face went white at my words, and she glared at the door. Probably glaring at Stanley in the other room. Her face turned red in no time at all. I looked into her eyes and asked again. She just blushed and didn't answer. "I heard you were supposed to take the same college entrance exams." The next moment, I felt an impact on my face. It took me a few seconds to realize that she'd thrown a cushion at my face. I've forgotten about such old memories. The sight of a fuming Ashley, her face bright red, is unbearably adorable. Usually, she's full of self-assuredness, but right now, she looks just a little bit younger and flustered. I feel closer to the Ashley I know. That night, I was dumped by Lily. "It's your responsibility to pick me up, Ashley." Tisk. She clicks her tongue, looking at me after my slightly crafty remark. I wait silently for her to speak. Finally, she opens her mouth after the long silence. Ashley's feelings are now completely laid bare. "If you were dumped, I guess it can't be helped. If you behave, I'll take you in." I think there must be an unbreakable bond between her and me. If only we had just told each other we loved each other back when we were students. I'm amazed at how far around we've come. From now on, I want to spend my life with her. I want to take my time hearing about her life when I wasn't around. "So, when's the wedding?" I tease Ashley, riding on the wave of excitement, and she gives me an exasperated look. "For now, make sure you propose properly once the job is done." The moment her expression shifts from exasperation to a full smile, My life changes color completely. I want to promise her a life happier than anyone else in the world. I truly feel that from the bottom of my heart. She gets up from the sofa and returns to her desk, immediately resuming work. I sit next to her, trying to help out as much as I can. There's a bug that keeps occurring here, I explain, pointing at the source code displayed on her computer. Her fingers, writing out the code for review, hesitate for a moment. What if we do this? Oh, I was thinking the same. Ashley quickly begins to refactor the program. I am in awe of her technique. David, you're pretty talented. Makes it easy to work with you. We're a great team. Looking at the system now running smoothly, she smiles joyfully. It was just like being back in our student days. The classmate who was the only one who could shake my feelings since high school soon became my wife.